Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel, The Scarlet Letter, is set in Puritan colonial New England, in a society where the mores are very rigid in terms of how people are to interact with one another. Hester, the main character, has a child out of wedlock, and as her punishment from the society, she is required to wear a stitched letter A on all of her garments thereafter, standing for adultery. She does this in part because she refuses to release the identity of the father of the child, who is a local pastor. Hester then raises her daughter, Pearl, as a single parent, something that is challenging in any age, but particularly challenging given the rigid mores of that particular setting. Pearl turns out to be a very unruly and wild child. And at one point, Hester laments before God that Pearl is her greatest blessing from God, but also her greatest curse. Those of you who are parents might know what that's like. You might know what it's like to have someone that you love very deeply, but who can get on your nerves and frustrate you and hurt you sometimes, like no one else. Love is very tricky and very difficult. Our epistle reading today is from the book of 1 John, a book that represents pastoral instruction for a church or maybe a small group of churches. A set of letters that is associated with the community that first gave us the gospel that we call John. And in this passage we read today, it talks about the nature of Christian love. But love in the context of this epistle isn't some sentimental notion that is inscribed on a greeting card. Love in this context is very difficult work, because the ultimate sign of the kind of love that is being described here is the cross, that the Son of God was willing to take on the pain, the suffering, and the humiliation of all humanity in order to show humanity just how much we are loved. It is this powerful, sacrificial love which overwhelms us and converts us. That's the nature of the love that the writer of John is describing. It's a love that requires humility, patience, tenacity, an open mind, and at times trial and error. And it's a love that the writer of John tells us should not be conveyed just by what we say, but by what we do. That's the nature of Christian love. And who we are and how we can be evaluated as a Christian church can be seen as focusing on how good you and I do at sharing God's love with others. A love that the writer of this epistle says is placed within us by the Holy Spirit and given to us to manage. A few years ago, you may have remembered when Ebola was in the news, and there was concern about this in the western parts of Africa. And about that time, I went to a district conference. And at the district conference, the DS invited a missionary couple that were stationed in Sierra Leone to come and to address the assembly that was there. And they said that they were delayed in getting back into the country to go back to their mission field because of delays of visas due to the health concerns relating to Ebola. And one of the missionaries said something that was very telling. You know, it's one of those times where something was in the news and it was right there in front of us. But sometimes when a story is in front of us like that, it can exaggerate what's actually happening. And this missionary said, I am concerned about Ebola, but I'm even more concerned about malaria. The estimates are that about 6,000 people may die this year as a result of Ebola. But the estimates are also that 600,000 will die with malaria. And among the victims, over 80% will be children under the age of 6. That's one of the reasons that the United Methodist Church for many years has raised awareness and money to send supplies in the way of mosquito netting and pharmaceuticals and healthcare professionals to that part of the world. And for many years, there were fundraising efforts that went on. One involved inviting churches in this conference to have lemonade stands, the way some of us did when we were children, where churches sponsored this and used this to raise money. And as a result of many years of careful work, $8.5 million was raised to go to a World Health Organization that would not only provide the equipment, but also build clinics and healthcare professionals to contact and combat not only malaria, but other diseases as well. Bishop Cho said he was amazed and humbled that throughout the Virginia Conference, the churches that raised the most money were some of the smallest churches in this conference. Tom Berlin spoke to the Virginia United Methodist Annual Conference about the impact that this work had done to combat malaria within the mission field. He said many of these missionaries were serving in churches where Christianity was a minority religion, but people were very touched by the efforts of Christian ministries to combat malaria in that area. As one man told a missionary, I don't know much about the Christian faith, but I do know that your group is the one that wants to prevent my son from dying. That leads to not only this wonderful charitable work that helps us share God's love with other people, but that provides a powerful witness. A witness that has enabled the United Methodist Church and the Christian church in general to grow in that part of the world, while the Christian church is in decline in Europe and in the United States. The bishop, as I mentioned, was impressed with the fact that some of the smallest churches in our conference raised the most money. That's because these churches appreciate the great resource we have in God's love and the need to share God's love with others however we can. A church may not have as many members as it once did, and cash flow may not be the way we wanted it to be. But God's love is always our greatest resource. And how we are evaluated as a church depends on how well we do in sharing God's love with others, not just in word, but also in action. Traditionally, the epistles of John are associated with the church community that John, the disciple, helped to found. And there's a legend about what happened at the end of John's life. According to tradition, John is the only one of Jesus' original disciples who lived to old age. All the other disciples were martyred, died in terrible ways, as Jesus did. But John lived to be an old man and died of natural causes. And towards the end of his life, John's disciples were pressing in on him, wanting to know things about what Jesus said and did. Master, they would say, you were there with Christ himself. You saw what he did. You heard what he did. What can you reveal to us about Jesus' teachings that we don't already know? And all John would say to them was, brothers, love one another. Well, yes, but what about this parable? What is the actual meaning of it? And did he really say to Peter the things that are recorded in the gospel? And how did Peter interpret that? Finally, John says to them on his deathbed, brothers, love one another. That's all there is. Love is very difficult work, but that is the work of the church. then, now, and for eternity.